So it finally happened. After months of speculation, Crystal Dynamics officially announced this past weekend the news that I think we all saw coming, and that is that Marvel's Avengers is going to receive its final update on March 31st, 2023, and all official support is going to end on September 30th. Now, if you've been subscribed to the channel for a while, you might have seen a few videos I've made on this game in the past, and you'll know that I've been a fairly vocal critic of this game, and I just want to make it very clear that that has never come out of a place of hate for this game, but rather a place of disappointment. I always wanted this game to be successful. These are characters that I love, that I grew up with, and I've always really wanted a third-person action-adventure game starring the Avengers, especially Captain America and the Hulk. They're two of my favorite Marvel characters, and unfortunately this game just never really lived up to expectations. So this past Friday, Crystal Dynamics delivered the news via a post on their website titled, "Final Update on the Future of Marvel's Avengers," and it says, "To our amazing community, after 2.5 years and introducing 12 of Earth's mightiest heroes, following Update 2.8 on March 31st, 2023, we will no longer add new content or features to Marvel's Avengers. All official support for the game will end on September 30th, 2023. Even after official support ceases on September 30th, 2023, both single and multiplayer gameplay will continue to be available. See below for more information. Update 2.7, which added the Winter Soldier hero and Cloning Lab Omega level threat, is the last new content to be added to the game. No new cosmetics are coming to the marketplace, and all final balance updates will occur in Update 2.8 in March. Along with the end of development, we'll also be turning off the cosmetics marketplace. When Update 2.8 launches on March 31st, 2023, credits will no longer be purchasable, and all remaining credit balances will be converted into in-game resources to aid ongoing adventures. As a show of our appreciation for our community, starting March 31st, 2023, we will make all the game's marketplace, challenge card, and shipment cosmetic content available to all players for free. Every single outfit, takedown, emote, and nameplate from the marketplace, challenge cards, and shipments will be free for all players from this date onwards if you own a copy of the game. Gifting the full library of marketplace cosmetic content is a way to thank our community by letting everyone experience the breadth and depth of content in Marvel's Avengers. We know this is disappointing news, as everyone in our community has such a connection to these characters and their stories. We're so grateful that you came on this adventure with us. Your excitement for Marvel's Avengers, from your epic photo mode shots, to your threads theorizing who our next heroes would be, to your Twitch streams, has played a large part in bringing this game to life. We hope you continue to play and enjoy Marvel's Avengers. We can't thank you enough for the support and for being part of our super team." So there's a few things to unpack here, and I think the big one for a lot of people is going to be that as of March 31st, all of the cosmetics in the game are going to be free. So if you haven't already and you're kind of on the fence about getting an MCU skin or one of the new comic-inspired legendary skins, hold off on buying any credits, don't pay for it, just wait until March 31st, and you get it for free. I know there was just a bundle released the other day that has MCU skins for all the characters, and it's on the pricier side of things, so definitely avoid spending your money on that if you can. The second thing is that multiplayer will still continue to be available, and all of the content will still be playable even after the March 31st update and after September 30th. It's just that after September 30th, there aren't going to be any more updates, so if you run into any bugs or anything happens with your account where you lose progress or lose any items you have, there won't be any fix for that, so hopefully if you're still playing this game then, nothing goes wrong for you. Now, it's important to note that Crystal Dynamics also stated in their post that after September 30th, there's no guarantee that the servers will stay up indefinitely, but there is no solid date for the servers themselves shutting down, so if you're planning on continuing to play multiplayer, you'll be able to do that until that happens, whenever that might be. And finally, after that September 30th shutdown date, Marvel's Avengers is going to be delisted, so it will no longer be available for purchase on digital storefronts. So obviously, if you were a big fan of Marvel's Avengers, this news is going to be disappointing to you. I know there was a handful of people who were still playing this game regularly, and of course, if you enjoyed it, that's great, and I respect that, but I think for most people, the writing has been on the wall for a while now, as I said before, and this game's days were numbered, because as much as it did get a few things right, this game got a lot wrong. So what I kind of want to do right now is just break it down and go into why I think this game failed to live up to expectations. And I think that all starts with the core gameplay loop. It's no secret that Marvel's Avengers has struggled to maintain a solid player base since its launch. Numbers have steadily been declining, and each event or content update they added brought back fewer and fewer players than the previous one. And I think a lot of that owes to the core gameplay loop. If you look back at the catalog of live service games that have released over the past decade, very few have been successful long term, and the few that have been generally have a few things in common. The big standouts to me are the battle royales. And I think the big thing that allows a battle royale to stay fresh longer than a game like Marvel's Avengers or Destiny or The Division or some other live service PvE game is that it's a PvP-centric experience. When you're playing a PvP game, there's someone on the other end who you're competing against, and that creates an opportunity for players to engage in creative gameplay. You have someone who you're trying to outthink and outplay on the other end, and they're capable of doing things that aren't scripted. They're engaging in behaviors that maybe weren't intended or aren't expected, so it adds this element of replayability in that every game is going to be unique. You look at a PvE experience, on the other hand, when you're just fighting against the same robot enemies over and over again, or doing the same stand in the shape until it turns your team's color objective day after day, mission after mission, it gets really boring really quickly. Because no matter how many times you play it, the enemy behaviors are still going to be the same. They're still locked to the same set of scripted behaviors that they always have been. The objectives are still in the same locations. You still have to do the same things over and over again to complete each mission. And that problem is amplified in Marvel's Avengers because there are so few missions with so little variety. You look at the level design even. So much of the level design is recycled in one mission after another that, to be honest, when I played this game, a lot of times I felt like I couldn't tell which mission I was playing because so many of them just felt so similar to one another. And again, that amplifies the feeling of repetitiveness because not only are you going into the same missions, beating up on the same enemies with the same moves all the time, but you're also doing it in the same environment all the time, with relatively little differentiation between each level. Obviously, there are a few different biomes in the game, whether you're in the Pacific Northwest area or the snowy tundra or the New York area, but when you get into these AIM facilities, they all look the same in the inside, and it creates this sense of monotony that really just exacerbates how repetitive the gameplay feels. Now, aside from the repetitiveness of the gameplay itself, when you look at the combat and the objectives, capture this point or prevent the enemies from getting inside this area for however long, you also have an unsatisfying looting experience that adds this element of now not only are the missions feeling repetitive, but they're also not very rewarding. Now, I don't know how other people feel about this, but I think something that gets overlooked as far as its value to a game like this is having a looting system that adds some kind of tangible sense of ownership or reward when you pick up a new item. And what I mean by that is being able to feel like you actually have the new item that you've just picked up, and usually that means having an item that when you equip it will alter your character's appearance. I think that having some element of personalization or customizability to characters really helps a player to feel invested in the character because they can sort of create their own style and really feel like this character is their own. Obviously, with a property like Avengers, these characters are already very well established, so you can't really go and customize what the character themselves looks like. But if you look at games like Injustice 2 or even the recently released Gotham Knights, for as underwhelming of an experience as that was, you'll see that there are elements of each character's suit that, while they can retain the iconic look and feel of the character, you can also personalize them to an extent to make it feel more your own. In Marvel's Avengers, that was accomplished through selling skins on the marketplace, rather than through rewarding the player with tangible gear pieces that they could use to swap out and create their own style for a character. I think that having a looting system where each piece of gear you collect and equip changes your character's appearance would have added that element of personalization that would have made looting feel a lot more rewarding, and then there would have been more incentive to grind for full gear sets in that, if you want to have a uniform looking aesthetic to your character, you would have to grind the missions over and over again to collect each piece. The way it is right now, collecting that gear does nothing but change your stats, and for a lot of people it doesn't really feel engaging because you're not really seeing much of a tangible reward on screen. Now, at the same time, I know that there are people out there who actually like the system of having skins that just completely override characters' look, and that's fine, but I don't think that having a looting system that affects your character's appearance and having a skin-based system like Fortnite are mutually exclusive ideas. If you look at a game like Fallout 76, which again I know a lot of people found to be an underwhelming experience, that is pretty much exactly the system they have in place, where you can pick up and equip armor and wear it and it affects your character's appearance, but then you can also put a clothing override on top to alter your character's appearance and hide the armor. And I think having something like that in place in Avengers would have added to the looting experience in a way that gives it that element of personalization and makes it far more engaging in the long term. And I think what would ultimately be the result of that is that gameplay would feel more engaging and that people would have more incentive to grind missions over and over again to get this gear set that they want, to have that element of personalization and to create the character they want to create. And it would also have given players the option to earn skins through gameplay rather than just by spending money, which I know turned a lot of people off of this game. Instead, what ended up happening with Avengers was that it took over a year and a half after the game's release for them to add earnable cosmetics in the way of shipments. The only other way to get cosmetics without spending money was to buy whatever was available in the cosmetic vendor rotation, which for the longest time was bugged and didn't rotate properly. And so there were really never that many options available to players as far as personalization goes for the longest time, and I think that hurt this game in the long run. So you've got a repetitive core gameplay loop and an unsatisfying looting experience. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that the game was doomed to fail just on the basis of those two things alone, and I think more could have been done to try and extend the game's life than what we actually got. Because even with those gameplay mechanics the way they were, players were still playing this game. But one of the biggest complaints from the community was always that there was a lack of content in the game. And obviously part of that goes to repetitive missions. You look at the mission variety and the level design. A lot of it is recycled from mission to mission, and there isn't really a ton of variety. You look at even the bosses. How many times did we fight Taskmaster and Abomination over and over again? And yet I think even with the repetitive gameplay and the unsatisfying looting experience, this game's life cycle could have been extended by treating it sort of as a single-player game, in that they should have focused on creating story expansions. Throughout the game's 2.5-year life cycle, we got 3 story expansions. We got the Taking Aim, Future Imperfect, and War for Wakanda expansions. Now, I think the biggest problem with those is that they were all very short in length, and they also didn't really add much as far as new gameplay wrinkles. With Future Imperfect and Taking Aim, obviously we were fighting the same enemies as the base game, so there was really no new gameplay introduced from a combat standpoint. And then with War for Wakanda, although we got new enemy types, the objective-based gameplay didn't really change all that much either. We got the new fuse machines where you had to go and break each part of them, but personally I never really felt as though that was something that was all that engaging. It didn't re-engage me in the game the way I was hoping it would. Again, to look at another live service game that's been a little more successful over its lifespan, looking at GTA Online, and it didn't necessarily start out as the sort of live service model as we know it today, where you're getting regular free content updates and weekly or monthly events to bring players back into the game and give you new rewards and seasonal things and that sort of stuff. But at the height of its popularity, GTA Online was receiving 3 to 4 major content updates per year, each of which added a new wrinkle of gameplay, whether it was the smuggler gameplay or weaponized vehicles, or adding cargo warehouses for you to run your own illicit businesses out of, or the bikers update and all the businesses that came with that. There were so many new gameplay elements added with each update. Not only that, but each update also had a steady drip feed of content that would be added week after week for usually a couple months after each update, which would keep players engaged with the content and coming back to the game week after week until the next update was ready to be released. You look at Avengers on the other hand, when War for Wakanda launched, that was it. There wasn't really any drip feed content, and we had to wait months until after its launch to get the raid that went with it, the Discordant Sound Omega level threat. And that in itself recycled a boss that we'd already fought with Claw. So it really didn't add anything new to the game and took forever to be released. Or you look at Future Imperfect. Sure, it added the Future Wasteland map area, but the gameplay within that area was still the same. The enemies were still the same, and so it didn't add anything new. And because it was all available pretty much up front, players were able to blow through the content within the first week it was out, and now all of a sudden there's no reason to come back to the game. At least not until the next major content update. And as we saw with Avengers throughout its life cycle, those major content updates were few and far between. And when you've got a content drought that lasts month after month, obviously there are going to be other games coming out within that time span that either are better quality games or that are at least willing to put in more of an effort to keep players engaged and keep them coming back. So all of a sudden, those players who have left and gone on to play other things don't really have a reason to come back to Avengers until months down the road. And by that time, who knows, maybe they've decided they want to get rid of their copy of the game, or they just don't want to reinstall it on their console, or whatever. But when you leave a game for months without any content, it makes it that much harder to get the players who left the game behind to come back in and start playing again without providing some sort of incentive. And when all the content is available up front and can be blown through in, 4 or 5 hours, once they've done that, they're going to say, okay, well, great, it wasn't really worth coming back for this, and they're just going to leave again. The only real drip feed content this game ever really got was skins. And I know a lot of people aren't necessarily fans of drip fed content, but at the very least it keeps a game alive by bringing players back week after week to see what's new. And if they weren't going to have drip fed content in this game, at the very least, the Omega level threat raids needed to be ready to go within a reasonable time after the major content updates, and that was never the case. The Cloning Lab Omega level threat, the first raid that was announced for this game, was announced a month after this game's release. It was announced in October of 2020. We didn't get that update until November of 2022, alongside the Winter Soldier. It took 2 years to release content that they announced right after the game launched, and there's no reason that players should have been waiting that long for something that was announced right after this game's launch. That content should have already been getting worked on and should have been ready to be released soon after the first major content update. Instead, when the game launched, all we were left with were all the base missions, which we played time after time until we got our characters to power level 150, and then there was just nothing to do except grind the missions over and over again and hope for better gear. There was no content added to the game. And yes, I know we got the Hive missions, but let's be honest, those were not new content. They recycled level designs, they recycled mission objectives, they recycled bosses. There was no new content added to the game. There were no new enemies, no new bosses, nothing. It took a long time for them to even add seasonal events to the game. And when we did finally get gameplay events, we only got a small handful. We got the Corrupted Vibranium, the Red Room Takeover, and the Tachyon Surge events. And to be honest, those didn't really do a whole lot to shake up gameplay in a fundamental way. I think the one that altered the gameplay most was the Tachyon Surge events, where it put missions on a timer, but realistically, that isn't enough to make it feel like a true in-game event that is worth tuning in for. It didn't really fundamentally alter the gameplay in a way that said, okay, I need to check this out. The rewards for the events were also underwhelming, and that again goes back to having a generally underwhelming looting experience. But between the lackluster events and not putting out content with the major updates and not having a drip feed to keep players engaged steadily, there just was never enough content in this game to hold players over and keep them engaged in the game long term. And to me, part of what makes this lack of content so frustrating is that they had a plan in place and just never followed through on it. There was clearly a long-term storyline being set up with the Kree invasion. At the end of the main campaign, we fight the Kree Sentry and it sends its probe into space, and then we've got the Future Imperfect DLC, which shows the aftermath of the Kree invasion in the alternate future, with Nick Fury being frozen in that time bubble fighting the Kree, and it really seemed like the story was going an interesting place, and they just chose not to continue it. And on the one hand, I understand not wanting to invest the time and money it would need to develop those story expansions when the game hasn't been generating the kind of revenue they expected or hoped it would. But at the same time, the reason the game wasn't making as much money as they wanted it to, and the reason players weren't continuing to play it, was because there wasn't enough content being added to the game regularly enough to keep those players engaged. So they really did it to themselves, and I think continuing to pursue that story content might have given players more of a reason to return than releasing recolor after recolor of skins week after week on the marketplace and hoping that players would continue to play the same missions over and over again. And it really leads me to ask, and I'm sure a lot of other people are asking the same question, where did they put all their time and effort into with this game? Because ultimately, what I think the legacy of this game will be is laziness on the part of the developers. Now, I'm not saying outright that they were lazy, because at the end of the day, I don't really know what's going on behind the scenes. But as the player, as the consumer, my perception is that this has been a lazily made game. All you need to do is look at the last two characters to release to see just how lazy it seems. You look at the Winter Soldier. All of his melee attack animations are recycled animations from Captain America. His light combo attacks are the exact same. You look at his heavy attacks, they're almost identical, and it even looks like the Winter Soldier is swinging around Captain America's shield on his arm when he's doing his heavy attacks, even though there's no shield there, because he's a carbon copy of a character that's already in the game. And you have to wonder why it took months for him to be developed and released when he's already reusing so many assets that already exist within the game. It's kind of mind-boggling. The same thing with Mighty Thor. She reuses a lot of the same assets as far as her attack animations as Thor, and you have to wonder, why did it take so long for this content to be released when so much of it already exists? You look at the skins in the marketplace. So many of the skins that were released over the first year and a half of this game's life cycle were just lazy recolors of skins that already existed in the base game. Now, you can't tell me that any one of those took more than an hour to create. In fact, I've seen people online who have been able to make skin recolors within 5 minutes. There was no excuse for them to be releasing lazily recolored skins week after week and not putting an effort into releasing substantial gameplay content. And you know, I'm not outright against microtransactions. I have spent money on skins in games, and I'm willing to do that to support a game if it's clear that they're putting in an effort to make me want to play the game. And had they been putting in the kind of effort on their cosmetics, at least, that they put in the last year or so of the game with the actual comic-inspired outfits that they've been putting out, I think it would have been a lot easier for a lot of other players to put money into those, instead of, you know, having all these recolors thrown in their face and being asked to pay the same price for every different color of one skin. And as I've said before, the missions too were just lazily recycled. The same environments, the same bosses, the same enemies, used over and over again for different missions, and that does very little to inspire confidence in the player base that any of the new content that they release is going to be worth playing. Because it creates this perception that the developers are just lazy and that they don't care about this game. And it really seems like what they're trying to do is squeeze as much money out of the player as they can while putting in as little effort as humanly possible. And as the player, I don't want to invest my time in playing a game like that because it's just not an enjoyable experience. So, as I said before, I think ultimately the legacy of this game will be laziness and a masterclass in how not to handle an IP that was riding an all-time high wave of popularity. This is one of the most popular multimedia franchises in history, and somehow they dropped the ball on it utterly and completely. And my biggest hope is that if we get another Avengers game in the future, whoever's responsible for developing it can look back at this game, learn from its mistakes, and put in the kind of passion and enthusiasm to making it the kind of game that the players want it to be, that it needs in order to be successful. And to everyone who's still playing this game and enjoying it, again, I respect that, and I'm glad you've enjoyed your time with it, and I'm really sorry that the game turned out this way, but at the end of the day, this game was just mishandled from start to finish. So that's going to do it for me today, guys. Thank you guys for watching. I appreciate it as always. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to leave a like and consider subscribing to the channel, and we'll see you in the next one.